Hey everyone, Haley here from The Foiled Plan. Today we are jumping into episode 3 of my creative design series. If you've missed episode 1 and 2, I strongly recommend backtracking and watching those first. I have a playlist that's specifically for my creative design series. In today's episode, we are going to be diving a little deeper into the actions menu, and we're specifically going to be working with the Canvas drawing guide. That's a tool that you guys are going to find very beneficial, especially if you're just starting out. So without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. Alright, so today we are starting with a blank canvas, and again, if you're not sure how to do even some of the simple things like this, make sure you go back to my basics video and watch that. Now, like I mentioned, we are going to be diving a little bit deeper into the actions menu. So the first thing that we want to do is tap the wrench, which brings up the action menu. Now, we're not going to be looking at the add sub menu yet. We're going to jump over to canvas, which is the second option. Now, in this menu, we're going to see crop and resize, drawing guide, edit drawing guide, which is grayed out, flip canvas horizontally, flip canvas vertically, and canvas information. We're going to be looking at the drawing guide, and this is what I find the most helpful when I'm designing anything. So beside the drawing guide, you'll see that there's a toggle, and if you just tap that, it's going to turn the drawing guide on. So now you can see that it's blue. Now I have grid lines. So this is something that I use most often because then I can make sure that I'm drawing things straight or that I am creating the correct proportions for things. I just find it extremely helpful. So there's lots of different versions of the drawing guide. So it's not just grid lines at this size, because maybe you need something larger or smaller, or maybe you want something different altogether. So if you want to change this drawing guide, you're going to click Edit Drawing Guide. So it's the option right below. So now the drawing guide menu has popped up, and that's what's taking over your whole screen. Just so you are aware, when you are using the drawing guide, if you see these lines on the screen and then you go and you export or print your image, these lines will not show up on that image. It's just to use as a guide while you're creating your design. So don't worry about having to get rid of the lines before you export or print. So what you're going to see is down here at the bottom, 2D grid, isometric, perspective, and symmetry. So you have some options for how you can adjust the 2D grid. So let's just take a look at these. So the first option is thickness, and you can drag that from side to side and adjust the thickness of the lines. So you see I've brought it over to 100%. The lines got thicker. If I drag it over, they're so thin that you can hardly even see them. The default is usually around 60 though. Now there's also opacity, which we went over opacity in the basics video, which was episode 1. But if you don't recall, opacity is how opaque the lines or the image is. So if I bring that all the way up to 100, you're getting the full amount of color, and then if I drag this down, the lines become less visible. So I'm going to bring that back up so I can see it. Then we see over here there is grid size. So right now I have mine set to 191. You can click on that number and you can adjust it manually with typing in the exact numbers. I have the option to resize the grid in millimeters, centimeters, inches, or pixels, and I have mine set to pixels. You can just touch anywhere on the screen to get rid of that menu, because you can also just drag and you can resize the grids that way. And then another thing that you can do in here is, let's say this color, you don't see it very well. Maybe you want to change, maybe your design has a lot of greens in it, so it's hard for you to distinguish which lines are ones that you've drawn and which lines are actually that of the grid line. So you can see this rainbow up top here on the screen. You can actually touch the dot and you can drag it around and you can actually change the color of the grid lines. Now, I don't typically change the color of my grid lines because it doesn't really make that much of a difference to me. I'm typically working with a black brush, so I have no issues seeing this, but just keep that in mind that you can change the color if you would like to. Now, another thing that you can do with the 2D grid is you can turn it. So if you want your grid to be on an angle, you'll see there's a little green dot at the top here. If you click on that, you can begin to rotate it, and now your grid line is on an angle. So perhaps you want to draw something on an angle. This would be a good way to set up your grid line. You can also adjust where the center point of the rotation is by holding this dot and moving the grid over. And now the green dot is over here, so I can adjust it this way. Now, if you've made a change that you didn't mean to make, I'm gonna give you a little preview on our shortcuts lesson, which hasn't quite happened yet. But if you take 2 fingers and you tap them on the screen one time, it's going to revert back to the last move you made on the screen. If I tap again, it's gonna reverse everything again, one more step. And now the canvas is back to before I moved the grid lines at all. So if you were to turn on the assisted drawing button and you have the 2D grid selected as your drawing guide, when you go to actually go back to your canvas and start drawing, any stroke that you make with your brush is going to be aligned to your drawing guide. So in this case, I'm using the 2D grid. So all of my lines are going to align with this 2D grid. So it's almost like it's acting like an invisible ruler of sorts. If that doesn't really make sense to you, don't worry, we will dive deeper into that in another episode. But don't hurt your brain thinking too hard about it right now. All right, so that is the 2D grid, which, like I said, I use the most often, but there's also some other drawing guides that we can go over that will be beneficial to you while you're designing. So the next option is isometric. So if we click that, now we have triangles that are slightly on an angle, which again, we have the same options. We can adjust how these grid lines are being shown. We can move them around. We can change the color. We have the options down here at the bottom to adjust the thickness, opacity, grid size, and we can again turn the assisted drawing on if we so choose. Now the isometric guidelines are very similar to the 2D grid. A lot of people will use the isometric lines to create hand lettered designs because most hand lettering and calligraphy is done on a slight angle. So these lines are also very beneficial. Now let's move on to perspective. So this is great if you are creating landscapes, if you're wanting to create drop shadows. It's great for a lot of different things. So you'll see as soon as we click on that, the canvas is completely white. And up here at the top it says tap to create a vanishing point. So we'll tap anywhere on the screen and watch what happens. So now we have a vanishing point. If I was to draw a house over here and I wanted it to be 3D, then I would draw the house angled towards the vanishing point. And if you decide you want to move that, you can definitely do that. These are great for sunsets, the beach, anything like that. It's a great tool. And then you also have the option of rotating it if you need. Now, again, we have these options here, but we just don't have the grid size option because this is not a grid. You get what you get as far as the size goes, but you can adjust the thickness. Now, let's move on to symmetry, which is a really, really useful tool. So if we click on symmetry, it's gonna pop up with one line down the center. Now, in order for me to explain how this one works, we're actually going to go into the canvas so you have a better idea of how things function. If you're not sure what symmetry is, it's when two or more parts of something are mirrored, so they are identical and they're facing each other. So with the symmetry guideline turned on, we can adjust the thickness, opacity, we can turn on assisted drawing, and then there's also something called rotational symmetry, but we'll come back to that one. So the line of symmetry is going to start, it's vertical, and it's right down the center of the page. If we want it to be horizontal, we just click this button down here. And now whatever we draw in the top half of the screen is going to be mirrored down on the bottom half of the screen. Now we have quadrants. So we have 4 different spots where things will be mirrored. And then there's radial. A lot of people will draw mandalas, and the radial symmetry tool is an awesome tool for that. Let's go back to vertical. Now I'm going to click done so that you can see the effect that the symmetry drawing guide has. I still see that line down the center. I'm going to select a brush. Monoline is fine. And I'm going to stick with black so that it's easy for you to see. So let's draw something simple. A heart. You can see that I only drew on one side of the line and it automatically mirrored what I was doing as I did it. So I have a perfect heart. Now you'll notice I drew on the left side, but I can also draw on the right side. And I will have the same outcome. Whatever I draw is going to be mirrored identically on the other side. So let's clear all of that and let's go back into edit our drawing guide. Now let's try quadrant. Let's see what happens when I draw in one of the quadrants. So you can see with this, it's mirrored this way as well as mirrored this way. So I have 4 different quadrants and I only have to draw in one quadrant for it to show up in all 4 of them. Now let's go over to radial. We're going to click done and I only have to draw in one of these pie pieces and it's going to show up in all of them. Got a theme going here with hearts. You can see that they're showing up in every single one of these pie pieces, and I only had to draw it in one space. This can save a lot of time and it just helps you get that perfect image that you're looking for. Now, like I said, a lot of people will create mandalas, and this tool is perfect for helping that. Easy mandala. Now, if I were to turn on the rotational symmetry, my line stroke is going to be mirrored and rotated. So let's see what that looks like. So rather than it going the same way, it's mirrored and rotated. So that's what it looks like with the rotational symmetry turned on. Let's go back and turn it back off just so you can see the difference. Quite a difference. So feel free to play around with those and I'm sure you'll come up with some pretty neat designs. Now let's say you've created an image Sometimes when I'm creating a design, I definitely like to turn the drawing guide back off just so I have an idea of what everything looks like without those helpful lines running through it, because sometimes it's a little bit distracting to the eye. But then I will just turn the drawing guide back on and I will continue my designing process. All right, well, that is all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed episode 3 in my creative design series. I will be posting these types of videos at the beginning of each week and then still posting my regular content on Fridays. My goal for this creative design series is simply to get you guys feeling less intimidated and more confident using design programs. And my hope is that you guys are able to unlock your true potential when it comes to designing, whether it's for personal or business use. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like this video and subscribe so that you don't miss out when I upload. And that's all I'm gonna say. Bye!